All right. So we are looking at day 3 here. We're going to be looking at our chapter 4 notes. So this is going to be our fitness assessments for youths. So today we're going to be looking at the importance of like our subjective information and our objective information. You guys know how much they love to ask you questions about that, and I'm sure at this point, you know, it's very clear what is subjective and what is objective, but we're going to kind of get the definitions up here again. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to navigate the whole assessment process, starting with your questionnaire, moving into your objective assessments, and then moving into things like posture and performance assessments and stuff like that. And then we'll also talk about like any of the special considerations that are associated with like training youths, right? Like kids. Obviously, there are a few things like these traditional cardio assessments that we normally do, like the YMCA 3-minute step test or the Rockport test, like those things usually rely on the fact that like you have an adult body. And so those tests, they use these big complicated formulas, but those formulas are calculated for like an adult body with like a normal left ventricle and like adult enzymes and all the things that like we produce once we've transferred into adulthood, which youths don't really have. So we're going to be talking about how we sort of modify some of our cardio assessments for youths, because like we aren't going to, we can't perform those in the same way, because if you were to give a kid a YMCA 3-minute step test, they'd actually probably score really poorly because they just have a naturally elevated heart rate. So when we were talking about fitness assessments, before we kind of dive into it here, obviously, I just want to review my favorite thing, which is personal training in 3 steps. I know I harp on this all the time, but it's like if you can just remember this vision for like, this is your job, this is your career. Our job is to kind of go through these 3 main steps here, right? The first one is to identify whatever problem it is, right? And that's really what we're doing through an integrated fitness assessment. You can't write a program for someone. You can't because the whole point of writing a program is to address someone's like shortcomings and play to their strengths, right? Well, you can't know what any of those shortcomings are, and you don't know what those strengths are unless you perform an integrated fitness assessment. So you want to make sure that you are assessing their body fat percentage, their height and weight, their strength in certain categories, right? If you do a strength assessment, you want to test their agility, their cardio, and then you also want to know like all the subjective stuff, like are they on any medications that could affect their heart rate or blood pressure? What are their likes and dislikes? What hobbies do they have? Are they generally very sedentary, or are they generally very, very active? And so we'll kind of be looking at those fitness assessments sort of from that perspective. Once you've got that perspective and you've got an understanding of all of the data, now we can solve the problem, right? And a lot of times we have sort of a different definition of the word solve here. A lot of people think solve means it's like the problem's gone. It's like not necessarily. Like you are going to determine a solution. You are going to come up with the solve, right? And you're going to do that through integrated program design. Like if you tell me you struggle with your cardio, then I'm going to write a program for you based on someone who struggles with their cardio. If you tell me that you want to improve your agility, I'm going to write a program for you that addresses that agility. So I'm going to solve the problem by coming up with my solution, getting it on paper, and then getting it to you. And step 3 is going to be to implement that solution. Step 3 is like, all right, well, now that we know what is going on and how we're going to change it, let's go ahead and train them. Let's get them into the gym and actually do all this stuff. All right, hold on. The dog left, so I'm going to go walk him out. Okay. So that's kind of our 3-step method. That's sort of our 3 steps to success in the world of personal training, right? And we're really covering that first step today, which is the gathering of information, right? Let's figure out, how to identify any of the problems. We'll also do a little bit of solving today. I just want to go over a couple like simple examples, and then implementing them is when we actually get onto the gym floor, and everybody's going to have different implementations for their different solves. But yeah, so that is everything. So fitness assessment, what it is, it's the first step in creating like not only like an effective, but also like a safe program, right? It is going to be broken up into two major categories. When we talk about like what we are assessing for, we're assessing for subjective information, which is the immeasurable stuff, and our objective information, which is the measurable stuff. That gives us values based on all of those things so that we then know what we're trying to change. Like if you tell me what your baseline weight is, then I can, track that as we see improvements. And then we're also going to be able to identify any possible contraindications, which is really nice. So, if someone tells you they're like, oh yeah, I have a really bad like history with like a herniated disc on my right side. And so sometimes I get leg pain. It's like, great. Now we know about that herniated disc. Contraindications are going to be things like hyperextensions and, certain movements that put way too much pressure on there. We're going to keep a special eye on things. Or if someone's on like a certain type of medication, let's say they're on a blood pressure medication because they have elevated blood pressure, we know we shouldn't move their head around too quickly, right? Like we don't want to do things like sit-ups, because what that can do is that can like, cause blood flow to be stuck back there because they have pressure problems. And then all of a sudden, like they get woozy because, they just didn't get oxygen to the brain for a half a second. So that's going to be really nice about our fitness assessments. And then it also tells us like where to start, it gives us a really great sort of starting point so that we can come up with a progressive sequence of things, this is why, like, the OPT model is all about progression. It's all about building your foundation and then building things up slowly from there. So when we are starting, oh yeah, so kind of summarizing all that up, right? The goal of any personal training relationship should always begin with some type of fitness assessment so that you can get that data before training your client, right? Like we always want to make sure that we start with a fitness assessment. My friend, like I was telling you recently, my friend Danae was looking for like a trainer. And so like, she was like, what should I look for in a trainer? And I was like, number one thing is just make sure they do an assessment. Like don't ever train with a trainer who just writes you a program without knowing anything about your posture. And that to me is like, sort of the key indicator of like somebody who's writing specific routines versus general ones. I mean, and don't get me wrong, like really quick, like I always harp on about how important it is to be like very specific and stuff. I will say there's value. It's not that a general routine is valueless. Like it has value in the sense that like it burns calories and it can keep your heart healthy and things like that. But it'll never beat a specific routine. It's like something that's good versus something that's superb, like it's like a general, like you can go pick up a women's health magazine or a men's health magazine, just find one of those workouts that's in there and do it for a couple weeks and it'll get you a long ways, like I'm not knocking any of that. But then you're going to maybe pick up another issue next month and do a new routine based on that one. And what you're going to start running into is like, oh, this is really similar to the last routine, or oh, I was working towards this thing. Now I'm totally shifting directions, which shifting directions can be great because it's, sometimes like a new stimulus your body needs, but maybe you didn't spend enough time working on that one thing. So you never actually improved in it. And so you end up like, burning some calories and you kind of get like stagnated results, right? Versus like something that is designed to progress you. Like, so for instance, like this routine that I'm doing right now, I started with like sort of a 10 sets per body part routine for 4 weeks, which is designed to be kind of a reset for my body. It was pretty gentle and it was just an opportunity for me to kind of like, reset things and kind of work on some stuff posture wise that was getting a little sloppy. And then, and because quarantine, right? Like, and then, for the current, like where I'm at right now, I'm doing sort of a mid routine where it's like about 15 to 16 sets per body part. And then after that, I'm moving, into next month's routine, which is going to be like 20 sets per body part. And that's going to be like, where everything peaks, and it's going to be exhausting. I mean, like that's a lot of sets per week, which is going to lead to, if you keep that up for too long, you're going to overtrain and end up with some type of injury. So you reset and then it'll be back to like a 10 sets per body part routine afterwards. Now that's not necessarily like a NASM protocol thing. Like the sets per body part thing, that's not necessarily laid out in your book that way. That's never explicitly stated. But what you guys will notice is when you follow all of your acute variables, it'll land exactly kind of like that. And you'll notice that stabilization works really well for about 10 per body part. And you'll notice that the strength phase works really well for about 15, actually. So sometimes 15 all the way up to 20. Like strength has such a wide variety between like strength endurance up to max strength. But then power is very much like in the middle there as well because of how intense it is. So, it is kind of interesting. Like the one that you'll see with like the most sets per body part is hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is right in the middle of the OPT model. That's where it's like volume, like just turn your body to goo so that your body inflames, and then eventually you're walking around like this, which is exactly the goal. You have my favorite, thing to say, which is invisible lat syndrome. Walking around like this. It's like there's nothing here. So let's go ahead and look at our 2 types of data. I know you guys know this, but we got to review it. So we got our types of data. We've got our subjective information and our objective information. So your subjective information, it's kind of like a subjective opinion, like to me, the Marvel movies are fantastic. But if you ask someone else, they're like, no, they're common and basic drivel, That's a very subjective opinion. There's no way to measure who's right in this situation. Well, the same thing is true of our subjective information here, right? It's information that cannot be measured. So things that are included in the subjective information are going to be things like the physical activity readiness questionnaire, which is what you should always, always, always start every one of your fitness assessments with. It should be the first thing that you always go through with any new client. So what it is it's a series of questions related to determining whether or not the client is ready for exercise. Okay, that's the big thing. We're basically asking questions to see if they are actually ready to do any type of physical activity. And so it's particularly geared towards cardiorespiratory dysfunction. So it's most of the questions are related to the cardiorespiratory system. And let me tell you, this is so funny. I'm just going to point something out. I'm going to point one of NASM's flaws out that I think is really funny. The PAR-Q, by definition, and you'll find this definition in your normal textbook, and I think you'll find it it'll be in the youth textbook as well, but it's a series of questions related to the cardiorespiratory system that determines whether or not a client is ready for exercise. And it's funny, there is one question that is bone related on there that has nothing to do with your cardio system. And I've always thought that's really, really funny. I thought that's funny for 10 years, like when I got certified, being like, because I've, paid very close attention to these definitions. And I was like, well, technically that one's not the cardio system. So there's me nerding out for, actually we're going up on 12 years at this point. I never update I never update how long I've been in this industry until I get recertified. So it's like, how long have you been a trainer? And it's I've either been a trainer for 2, 4, 6, 8, or 10 years. If you asked me on year 9, I'd say 8. And then if you asked me on year 10, I'd say 10. And I don't know why my brain works that way. But anyway, so that is the PAR-Q, right? If your client answers yes to any of those questions, have you had chest pain in the last 30 days? Yes. Do you have trouble going up a flight of stairs? Yes. If they say yes to any of those, you want to make sure that you get a doctor's permission before exercising. Now, there are like waivers out there that you can give your client that say on them, like, I hereby sign that I am in full health or I'm in full knowledge of what I'm getting into, and those things will somewhat protect you. But the reason we do a PAR-Q is, number one, you don't want to hurt anybody. But number two, it keeps you as a fitness professional safe. That's really important to make sure that, let's say somebody does have a heart attack on your session, and then they try to say like, well, I had a heart attack because you pushed me too hard, right? It's like PAR-Q, and it's like, I cannot help but notice that you did not say yes to any of these questions, right? You didn't say you had a heart condition, and you knowingly did. The problem with that is that, like, when I don't have that knowledge, my job is to push you. And so, like, you create a scenario where we lost, right? And that's kind of the whole point of the Part Q. It is first and foremost to keep everybody safe, but it is also to protect you legally. So always start with that. And also do your waivers. Your waivers, they don't give you examples of waivers in the Sochi, or in the Sochi book, in the NASM book. They don't have any like example waivers or anything. They just have the Part Q. But every gym that you work in will also, make you do waivers and stuff. It's part of the job, but it's I guess it's just so different for every company. And every waiver is, written by each company's individual lawyer, that you don't get to see that. But for those of you who are thinking about training on your own and doing private clients, you will sign up, you will get insurance. You need to make sure that you get insurance as like a trainer to make sure that like you're liable, your liability covered. And those insurance companies will have pre-made waivers for you. So you can just download and print those off yourself. And it just, it's the same thing. It's the same waiver that you've signed a million times in your lives, where it's like, I hereby attest that I am in I am in full health, and I acknowledge the fact that exercise is hard, and if anything happens, it's my fault. So the next thing in your subjective information is going to be your general and medical history questionnaire. So this is sort of a two-parter questionnaire here. And so it's a series of questions that help us paint a picture of your client's medical background and recreation and hobbies, right? So it's going to have information about medications, any past surgeries, right? And then what they're interested in, sports and activities and things like that. Now, that right there is hugely important when we're talking about training youths, because this is going to give you a little bit of insight into what your youth is actually interested in, right? And that's very important because we know that, like we talked about yesterday, youths, not the longest attention spans, heck, most adults in this day and age don't have long attention spans. Speaking of which, let me go on a 20-minute story to highlight what I mean. No. So when you're getting your general and medical history questionnaire and you're getting that out of the way, it's great because you are going to know any like medications, and you're going to know, we have a table in your book that shows you like what types of, what effects those medications have. For instance, like beta blockers can lower blood pressure and they lower heart rate. And so, if you're measuring your client's heart rate and you're like, man, you're killing it, and they're over there dying, and you're like hitting that plus sign because their heart rate is just not going up very much. Not awesome, be aware of those medications that they're on. But the hobby stuff is honestly some of the most important information you can get. It tells you, like, if you get a client who says they're really like outdoorsy and they like to go hiking, right? That's great. That's something that you can use to kind of play to your strengths and be like, all right, well, let's, train you to kind of improve that hiking. Or maybe you find like what their dislikes are. And honestly, like sometimes, and I think it's somewhat rare, but sometimes knowing your client's dislikes are really great, because it's like, all right, I know you hate this, so I'm going to put it in the routine specifically. And they go, oh, you're the worst, and you have this kind of fun sort of banter back and forth where they're like, you're the worst. And it's like, I'm the best, and we're going to do this. And they're like, and then you train them through this thing that they kind of hate. And then they come around to it and they're like, all right, I mean, you kind of convinced me. I guess it could be fun. And it's like, oh yeah, that's so rewarding. I love getting people who hate cardio to do cardio, if that wasn't clear. So yeah, that's what's so great about the subjective information. I think that sometimes, as a trainer, you're one of two types. I tend to be, I think I've switched since I've become like, gotten into the teaching realm, and I've sort of been trying to highlight this for years, but I was definitely like an all-in objective assessment trainer. Like I put so much emphasis on objective stuff. And then I started noticing that like my clients cared more about the subjective stuff. Like I cared about the hard data because it's what, like objectively, when I know you weigh this much and then you weigh this much and then you weigh this much, I'm seeing a line of progress. You know what I mean? But subjectively, your client coming around to the idea of liking a specific exercise that they disliked before, that is like what's more important to them. And so I think it's easy to sometimes look at the subjective stuff and be like, yeah, you do it to keep yourself legally safe. I got it. Let's move on. but it's some of the most important stuff that you can gather, even if it can't be measured. And those are our two distinctions. Just remember subjective, immeasurable, objective, measurable. All right, let's get into the objective measurements. So this is the stuff that can be measured. Typically, objective information is number-based, although one of the most important assessments that we have is the overhead squat assessment, which is not number-based, not necessarily, right? Like when we look at it, we're looking to see, I'm gonna go ahead and pull this down here. If we have someone do like an overhead squat where they go like this and then they squat down and then we see their knees cave in, right? We see the knees cave in. We know that they're experiencing knee valgus, and so their adductors are firing when they're not supposed to. Their internal rotators are firing when they're not supposed to. Meanwhile, the muscles that are supposed to pull in the opposite directions, their abductors and external rotators, are not firing when they are supposed to. So you got muscles that are firing too much and you got muscles that are not firing enough. And so what happens is the joint gets pulled in a direction it's not supposed to, right? And so we don't necessarily measure that with a number. I'm not being like your knees caving in 20 degrees or anything like that. Although you could if you use a goniometer, which is the stuff you'll learn with Mo. You could measure that stuff. But a lot of times you're going to eyeball it. And it's like, that's the thing. Like, if you look at me, I'll give you a real squat here. A lot of people don't really catch it too much. Stay put. There we go. Oh, okay. Well, tried my best. If I go down like this, right? It doesn't look like much knee valgus. It doesn't look really that intense. But you'll notice, especially with the way my freaking back has been acting, I sit slightly into my right side. Let me just tilt it like that, and then I don't have to step so far back. Knees, there we go. So if I go like this, right, you'll notice I sit ever so slightly into my right side, which means I have overactivity over here and underactivity over here. And then you can see the knees do like to wobble on the way out. It's not much, it's not like as intense as you might see some people do, but it is still something that happens. So we don't want it to happen at all, and that tells us what we can write our program around. It's like, all right, let's loosen up this side and tighten up this side and draw our client back to neutral, right? So we love the objective information. We're going to go ahead and start with there's a bunch of different there's sort of these big categories of objective information. It's much larger, right? It's going to be broken down into physiologic information, body composition assessments, respiratory assessments, which we'll look at some youth specific ones today, posture assessments, which we've been kind of using as the example so far, and performance assessments, which are also very youth-based. A lot of times we don't do a lot of performance assessments for our general clients just because generally our clients are just, I don't know. I think some like performance assessments don't tell you anything about your client, other than what their maximum lifting potential is or how fast they can do something. Like when you get a cardio assessment that puts them in the poor category, that tells you that you should focus on building up a cardio baseline, right? When you get a client who shifts to the right, like I did, that tells you that their abductors are too strong on the left and their adductors are too strong on the right. When you get a body composition assessment that tells you what their body fat percentage is, that's going to tell you whether you focus on a fat loss routine or a muscle building routine. But the performance assessments are just them versus future them. There's not like, it doesn't tell you, it's like when you score 13 seconds on a shark skill test or something, that doesn't tell me what type of routine to write. So I think sometimes performance assessments are another category that a lot of trainers will sort of move past really quickly. But these are the really fun assessments that can be a great piece of data to show your client. I love, like, every now and then you're going to get clients and they're going to plateau and they're going to be like, their weights are going to stop going up. And I was like, man, like I just feel like I'm not getting any stronger. Well, if you did more performance-based assessments, you've got more data points to be like, you know what, you're right, your bench has stalled a little bit, but your upper body agility has improved drastically. Look at how much faster you're doing the Davies test, you know? And so clearly there's core strength there and a lot of like upper body agility. So I really like performance assessments. They're kind of, and they're really fun. So what are the physiologic assessments? Our physiologic assessments are going to be things like your heart rate and blood pressure. Now you'll notice this is, we are starting off with this. This is a great place to start because you just finished doing all of your subjective information. So you're probably at a desk, your client's already sitting down, and one of the physiologic assessments that we're going to gather is the resting heart rate, right? So there's a couple different versions of heart rates here. When we say heart rate, we just mean number of beats in 60 seconds, right? We use heart rates during a workout. We use heart rates at a baseline. We want to know that we're just measuring the heart rate all the time. And so we've got a bunch of different sort of variations on the heart rate here. The first one you want to gather is resting heart rate, a client's heart rate when they are completely at rest. You guys have been sitting for most of this, I'm assuming. So like you're probably pretty close to your resting heart rate right now. Your true resting heart rate should be taken like when you wake up before your feet hit the floor in the morning. But for the most part, like you guys are sitting down right now. You've been sitting for about 5 minutes. I mean, you've been sitting for greater than 5 minutes, right? So that means that like chances are you're around your resting heart rate. And so that's one of the physiological, that's where you want to gather that like right off the bat. So once you have finished doing your PAR-Q, your general medical history questionnaire, once you've kind of finished explaining, you're probably doing a little bit of expectation managing with your client. Be like, all right, so once we're done with all this paperwork stuff, I'm going to gather a few physiologic assessments here at the desk before we move on to the gym floor. And then I'm going to take you through a posture assessment, some performance assessments, right? We're going to kind of walk our client through like mentally what they're going to be doing today. And they're going to go, okay, great. Like that all sounds really awesome. And then like, you're going to finish it off. Hopefully this is pro tip, by the way. You're going to finish it off by going, and then we're going to come back here and take a seat and we're going to review the data together. And I'm going to show you what some of those data pieces mean. And then you're at the desk, which is also where you sell your training sessions. So that's always where you want to begin and end your sessions with, you know, first time assessment clients. So they're already sitting down. So all you're going to do is gather their resting heart rate. So NASM's a big fan of gathering it at their radial pulse. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're going to put you're going to use your 2 fingers here in line with their thumb and index finger on their left arm just above the wrist. And so that's going to be the perfect spot for getting their radial pulse. And see if you guys can find that while I'm talking right here, because sometimes this is gonna be a little bit of a pain in the butt. Like for me, for instance, this is sometimes a little bit of a pain in the rear because, you know, number one, I got these little bony wrists, but number two, I've got a pretty darn like thick tendon right here heading down my arm, and so it kind of gets in the way sometimes. And you're going to get clients who have that problem. So you got to know that you want to find that and sometimes just move it slightly off to the side so you can really get into that pulse. And that's where I'm going to find that, right? But that's your radial pulse. Now you can always do your carotid pulse as well. Again, 2 fingers on the side of the neck, just off to the side of the Adam's apple right here. NASM doesn't necessarily recommend this one. I mean, they don't go super far out of their way explicitly to say like, don't do this. But they do mention it's like we, you know, as trainers generally prefer the carotid, the radial, just because it's much less invasive. And if you have a client who is in the middle of exercising, you know, you don't want to put pressure on their windpipe or anything like that. So we're a fan of the radial. I do recommend practicing it as often as you can so you can get pretty good at it. Luckily, we are living in the day of like, you know, smartwatches and things like that. So a lot of people can just sort of look at their resting heart rate. And these are pretty accurate, by the way, like they're not bad. Actually, I'll pull this off again. You'll notice like this type where they have like the little green sensor on the back. They're not awful, but they do get the less accurate the higher your heart rate is. So when you're gathering it for like a resting, it's actually not too bad, but they're not super great at catching heart rate once your heart rate really gets elevated. So that's their resting heart rate, right? And we know that a lower resting heart rate shows a much more efficient heart. If you have a high stroke volume, your heart rate doesn't have to pump as often. And so we know that cardiac output, our overall performance of the heart, the lower your resting heart rate is, chances are the higher your cardiac output is, and that's what we're looking for. Now, we also have target heart rate, which is a totally different concept. And target heart rate is the heart rate target for a client in order to apply the appropriate type of stress. So what we mean by this is like what your target heart rate is going to be, it's going to be your heart rate max times your intensity. Now, when I say heart rate max, what do I mean by that, right? Well, that's sort of a different concept, right? So your resting heart rate is, when you are in a resting state, your maximum heart rate is a formula that is always going to be the same formula. And it's going to be 220 minus your age equals heart rate max, okay? So your heart rate max is always just going to be 220 minus your age. That's true for youths as well, by the way. That does not have to change for youths or adults. It's the same thing. However, be aware, guys, not the best formula in the world. Like if we think about it, right? Like 220 minus your age is good, but it's like, what if you got two people who are both 30 and one of them is exercised every day and the other one has never exercised before? They both have the same heart rate max, right? So let's say they're 30, right? That's 220 minus 30. That's going to be a heart rate max of 190. So if their heart rate max is 190, then, and let's say you want them to exercise at 65% of our heart rate max, which 65% is pretty much where we call that zone 1, right? That's basically a jogging pace that they should be able to keep up for a really long time. So we take that 220 minus their age, minus, and they're 30 years old. So that gives us the 190. And then if we want to multiply it by 65% of their heart rate max, so we go times, and we're going to go 0.65 for 65%. That means that their target heart rate's 120, we'll round it up to 4, right? So I'd say, okay, I want you to get on the treadmill, and I don't want your heart rate to come below 124, and I want you to do 20 minutes. Not bad, right? Like we just saw how to kind of write a routine that's catered specifically to our client, but it's not super catered to our client, right? Like it's not perfect. And that's why in other classes, and they aren't going to do it necessarily in this one, but in other classes, we're going to talk about using our Karvanen formula, right? And actually, I will put that up here. So that's your target heart rate. I'm actually going to move this just because I think it's weird that target heart rate. I don't know what past Brad was doing, but I don't like his notes. So target heart rate is going to be max heart rate times intensity, which is what we just did. I also don't know why that's so much smaller. 14. So now we do have another way of gathering target heart rate, which is the Karvanen formula. Right, and that is going to be, which is a target heart rate form. Actually, that's not what it's called. It's just called the Karvanen formula. This is also known as the heart rate reserve method, right? And what that's going to be is it's a much more complicated formula, but it is a formula to determine target heart rate based on the difference between heart rate max and heart rate rest. So now here's where we are seeing like a difference between the two, right? Like in the last version, we had two people who were both 30 years old. One has exercised every day, one has never exercised before. They both got the same target heart rate of 123.5, right? That's okay, but this person who's exercised a lot is probably just like, this is pretty easy, you know? Whereas the person who's maybe never exercised before is like, this sucks, you know? They're both 30, they both got the same formula. So it's not exactly catered specifically to them. Now, here's the thing, go back to what we just mentioned before. We know that a lower resting heart rate is associated with a healthier heart. So now, if we take into account their resting heart rate when we write choose a cardio intensity for them, that can give us a very different number. So what this formula is going to be is, and it's fairly complicated, but it's going to be your heart rate max minus your heart rate rest, and then you're going to take that, oops, hold on, and you're going to multiply that by your intensity. Right, so I said 65% earlier. So you're going to multiply whatever number you get here by 65%. And then you're going to close that bracket, and you're going to add on the resting heart rate back on at the end, because we don't want to leave that totally out of the equation, right? We want to tack that resting heart rate back on at the very end there. And without it, your heart rate's going to be very, very low. So let's say our person's 30 years old again. And let's say they have a resting heart rate of 65, right? So we'll take 220 minus their age of 30, right? So that's their heart rate max. This is where we are in the formula so far. And then what we're going to do is we're going to subtract their resting heart rate. So we're going to take away, we'll say 65 beats, right? So we're going to say 190 minus 65. That's going to give us 125. So here we're this far. Right? We got 125. Now we're going to multiply it by our desired intensity, which our desired intensity was 65%. So 125 times 0.65. Now that gives us a pretty freaking low heart rate, which is why we got to tack on the resting heart rate back on at the very end. So 81.25, and we add the 65 back in after we're done. And that gives us a new target heart rate of 146.25, which is a much more accurate, much more catered specifically to that person with their low resting heart rate. Does that make sense, guys? So I want to show you my favorite website that I've literally, this is an old website. And you'll notice, you'll be like, man, that looks like, new internet old. And it has been up since I've been a trainer. But it is Carvenin calculator, briancalkins.net. This website still exists. I've been using this literally since college. And it's like, I love how it's like not secure. It's like, yeah, we know it's an old website, but it's just a formula and it does all the work for you. So again, 30, resting heart rate, 65. Boop. Original formula would be, this is, I don't know why it's always done this, but like, these are in the wrong color. But there's the number. You just can't see them on the website. It's, again, old. But it matches up down here. So the old version was, if we go 65 to 75, right? The old formula was 124 to 143. But now it's 146 to 159. And that's a much more accurate, catered specifically to our client version. So that's the website right there. And it's, still around. It's just that these links don't work anymore. This used to take you back home, and it had a bunch of other stuff too. That's the Carvenin formula, and that's sort of what we're looking at when it comes to target heart rate. Now, another one of our physiologic assessments, and by the way, you can calculate this before going onto the gym floor, right? You could do this right in front of your client while you're kind of getting them excited about like what their routine is going to look like. So it's like, okay, we just finished the park. You go ahead and stay seated right there. Let me see your left hand. I'm going to take your heart rate real quick. And so you get their heart rate. You write it down. It's like, okay. And you said that you were 35 years old, right? So your heart rate was this. So what we want to do whenever you're doing cardio, and you can literally just calculate all their zones right there in front of them. Like if you went to that website, right? Let's say you just pulled this up literally right in front of them and you did this, right? You're 35, your resting heart rate was 75, calculate, boom. And you would go, okay, so from now on, like I know exactly what your cardio should look like. Whenever you're on the treadmill, you don't want to go below 147. That's where cardio exercise begins for you. But at the same time, I want you to build up a baseline, and it's like, they're like, oh, well, I've never been able to run a mile. I always get exhausted before I finish a mile. Like I'll start running and then I get a side stitch and I have to stop. And it's like, okay, well, chances are you've been running too hard, too quick. You need to ease in. So I want you to warm up between 55 and 60% of your heart rate. So I want you to be somewhere between 136 and 141 for 5 to 10 minutes before you do anything else. That's probably going to be sort of a fast walk. And they would go, all right. And then they ease in. It's like they use a little treadmill thing. Maybe they don't have a heart rate monitor. Like maybe they're not testing, right? And that's okay. They don't have to, right? The treadmill's got the little hand ones. They're not great, but they're not bad, right? And then you put them on there and it's like, all right, so now I want you to be above 147, but I don't want you to go above 158. If you notice that your heart rate starts spiking and you get above 158, you're gonna need to slow down. And that's probably why you haven't been able to run a mile. You've been pushing yourself a little too hard, too fast. So then we say that, and then, but here's the thing, and then we start forecasting a little bit. We're gonna work each other. We're gonna build on this foundation until we get used to it. Then we're gonna start doing a little bit of like medium interval training, where we're gonna work between that zone that is gonna get you out of breath, but it's gonna work on your speed. We're going to take it up from 158 to 169. That'll be the next month. And then after that, eventually we can start working on peaking between 169 and 180. So you pull this all up in front of your client, or maybe you do the math in front of your client, knock it all out really quick if you're quick at math, and you show all that to your client. Again, this is all before you leave the desk, right? And they're like, this person already has like my cardio routine planned out before we even gotten to the gym floor, And then the last thing you're going to gather before you leave is blood pressure, if you do it. This is kind of outdated. Not a lot of gyms actually do blood pressure anymore. So a lot of times you're not going to have blood pressure cuffs at the gym that you work. But typically what we are looking for is a blood pressure of 120 over 80. If our client is at 140 over 90, that's going to be a client who has hypertension or high blood pressure. And if that is the case and they were not aware of it, they have been saying they have kind of been relaxed. Again, we want to make sure that on the par Q, we got to be a little careful about pushing our client too hard. If they said, no, I don't have a history of hypertension or anything like that, and then their blood pressure is like 150, it's like, well, maybe it's because they drank a Red Bull right before walking into the gym. Maybe they're in the middle of a stressful day. Maybe they took a pre-workout or something like that, which all those things do raise blood pressure. But it is definitely like a situation where it's like, you really don't want to train anybody if their blood pressure is super, super high, because you don't want anybody passing out on you. Next thing we're going to look at is our body composition assessments. And body composition assessments are things like your client's body weight. It's going to be things like their lean body mass. This is so weird. This is going in such a weird order. I'm going to skip past the cardio and we'll come back to it, I guess. What did past Brad do? These notes are out of order. What a weirdo. It's going to be their weight, their body fat percentage, their BMI, and circumference measurements, which are huge, by the way. I'm not a big fan of circumference measurements for kids because they're going to fluctuate so rapidly. But weight and BMI, those things are very handy, and body fat percentage. Body fat percentage, by the way, the formulas are fine. You don't have to worry about a body fat scale is still going to work just as well on a youth as it will on an adult. It's just measuring based on electric impedance. So that doesn't matter whether they're a kid or not. When I say body fat percentage, right, what I'm talking about is an individual's overall percentage of body fat compared with their overall weight. And so when we look at that, right, if we're measuring for someone's lean body mass, we're trying to figure out what their lean body mass and body fat percentage is. We're going to take their scale weight minus their body fat weight, and that's going to tell you their lean body mass. Now, remember, there's a very common misconception. Lean body mass is not only your muscle mass. That's what everybody thinks. They're like, it's your lean mass, it's my muscle. Your lean body mass is anything in your body not fat. If it's not fat, it's part of the lean body mass. Your bone, your water, your glycogen stores, right? If you're wearing a hat, anything, all that is your lean body mass. The bioelectric impedance scale is measuring body fat percentage and nothing else. So what you're going to do, let's say your client weighs 200 pounds, and then they have, let's say 20 or 30% body fat, right? So they're 200 pounds and they've got 30% body fat. Okay, whoops. Times 0.3, right, for 30%. That means they have 60 pounds of fat on their body, right? So they have 60 pounds of fat. So we would take 200 minus 60, right? Scale weight of 200 minus body fat weight of 60 pounds. That means that their lean body mass is 140 pounds, right? And so that's how we can sort of calculate those numbers out. So when your client says, you know, and they're going to do a classic thing when they see this, they're going to go, okay, so I need to lose 60 pounds. No, that would leave you with no body fat, which is very dangerous. But it does give us a pretty good idea of like where we want a lot of our weight to come from. So let's say your client has lost 10 pounds, right? And now they're down to 190, and you test their body fat percentage and it's no longer 30%. Let's say it is 28%, 0.28, right? So now they've only got 53.2 pounds of fat. So 190 minus 53.2. That means that they've got 136.8 pounds of lean body mass. Before they had 140, right? So that means that like this program that we've put them on, when they lost 10 pounds, 136.8 minus 140, when they lost 10 pounds, 6.8 pounds of it was body fat and 3.2 pounds of it was lean body mass. Now, some of that could be water, doesn't this? And this is why we got to remember that lean body mass does not mean muscle, right? It could have been water. It could be glycogen stores, which is mostly water. It could be lots of different things, right? But it is a fairly significant loss in lean body mass. So maybe that tells us it's like, all right, well, let's look at like, are we not strength training enough? Do we have enough protein in our diet? Are you getting enough sleep? That last one is huge. I'm putting emphasis on that to yell at myself, not you guys. Sleep. It is a very, very, very big deal. And so like we would maybe like look at some of those adjustments, and like that's another reason why we do assessments, right? It's like, hey, look, clearly the program is working. Our main goal is fat loss, right? But we are losing a little bit of lean body mass and we want to maintain some of that. So what can we do to shift these numbers a little bit? Do we need to raise your protein intake? Do we need to get it, you know, make sure we're going to bed on time? Do we need to work on stress reduction? What is it, right? And we would sit down and maybe talk to our client about that. So when you're doing body fat percentage assessments, the example I keep giving, and I have been giving, is bioelectric impedance, but there's other methods as well. So when you're getting body fat percentage, you are going to do it either using, oftentimes you're either going to use bioelectric impedance or skin fold calipers. Those are what we most commonly have access to. Although nowadays, like a lot of gyms are getting these fun little like mini DEXA scanners that you know, the Crunch has them where you stand on a thing and then it just goes and like kind of shows you what you're buying. It looks like when you go to the airport and you do this thing. It kind of looks like that actually for just a second. They're pretty good. They use little low X-ray, little low grade X-rays. Not enough to like really cause any damages or anything, but for the most part, I think it's still most common that you're going to use these two. So bioelectric impedance, the way that works is you are going to hold on to a little body fat tester, or maybe you're going to step onto a body fat testing scale, and it's going to determine your body fat percentage by sending an electric current throughout the body. And what that does is it measures your subcutaneous fat with that electric current, because here's what we know. We know that electricity travels through water really, really fast, but it travels through other tissues very slowly, particularly fat, right? Lipids don't conduct electricity very well, which, by the way, is actually why, remember when we talked about the nervous system and it's got all the fatty myelin that keeps like the signal protected, that means the signal can't leak. That's why we have that myelin. So that fatty tissue, it can't travel through very quickly. So if you tell the scale that you weigh 180 pounds, and it's going to go, okay, 180 pounds, the electric current should travel this fast. And if it travels faster than that, it knows the body fat percentage is low. And if it travels slower than that, it knows the body fat percentage is high, because the signal that traveled slowly did not conduct very well. There was a lot of fat tissue instead of a lot of conducting tissue. So that's how bioelectric impedance works, if you've ever wondered how those body fat scales work. Now, there is also skin fold caliper measurements, which is going to determine body fat percentage by measuring the amount of subdermal fat. And so what that is that's the fat underneath your skin folds. And so, you know, when you take like a tissue and you pinch it like that, right? There's body fat trapped in between there. And then the same thing is true on this side, right? And you can see like there's different sites, like this is a very lean site versus this, which is not as lean, right? I don't know if you guys can see that very well. You've got like other lean sites like here, right? And then this one back here, which is incredibly sort of not lean. We hold a lot of fat in the upper back, actually. And so those are our 4 sites that we're going to do. There's other formulas out there, by the way, like there's 6-site methods and other ones. NASM prefers the 4-site method, which is called the Dernan-Wamersley method. But it's where you do your biceps, triceps, subscapular, which is just below the wing there, and the iliac crest, which is just off to the side of your ASIS, that little knob on the front of your hip. And so you're going to measure all of those, total up all the numbers, and then you look on like a little table. So if we look at like, you know, if you do all 4 of those sites, you're going to take a look. Boy, that is just Xeroxed right out of a, oh, it's a picture. So you would just total up all the number of folds, right? Let's say you had 65 millimeters worth of folds and your client is 30 to 39 years old, right? Then they have a body fat percentage of 24.3. And so that's how you do it. You do the sum of the folds, right? 155, and you go over to the age. Hold on 1 second. So that's how that works. Lean body mass is not quite, yeah, I mean, it's very similar. Your fat-free body weight is somewhat similar. There is a little bit more, so lean body mass and fat-free body mass are very, very similar, except that lean body mass does also have your essential fat in it. Essential fat is the fat that's like important for your body to like maintain physiologic like survival. And it has, so when you're measuring things like that, the essential fat is kind of left on that formula. Whereas like fat-free is literally just anything that's like not lipid based. So like the fat around your organs, that's essential body fat, you know? It's there to insulate, you know, those tissues. So now we got to do the cardio stuff. Why is this like this? I gotta, hold on a second. I gotta move that too. I don't know what I was on. The first time I did this. You know, it's funny. There's probably going to be a thing in a minute. Like we'll probably get towards the end of this lecture and I'll go, oh, that's one. So cardio assessments, right? One of the most popular ones is going to be your YMCA 3-minute step test. Now, that being said, this is actually not a great test for youths. I want to mention it here because it's a great assessment in general, but it is not calculated for kids. So I would not actually use this assessment in a youth situation. But again, I've said this a million times, we're here to prepare for the regular NASM, so I got to teach it to you. So what it is, it's a cardio assessment that involves a stepping on a specific height step for 3 minutes at a specific tempo of 96 beats per minute, and then measuring how quickly your heart rate returns to normal afterwards. That actually is the important part. So you need to measure how the heart rate goes back to normal after the 3-minute step test. And when I say like 96 beats per minute, what I mean is you're gonna be on the step and it's gonna go right, left, right, left. That was 4 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so what you do is you actually want to play a little metronome, and every trainer should have a metronome app on their phone. But Google's got one that's free, and you literally just turn it to 96 beats and that's the pace that they're going to go at. And so, you know, that seems kind of weird. It's like, why do we have to do a specific pace? Why do we have to make sure it's 3 minutes long? And why do we have to always do it on a 12-inch step? Well, the reason for that is to ensure that every single client got the same amount of stress. And so every person who's ever done this assessment has had the same amount of stress applied to their body. And we don't measure how their body performs under that stress. What we measure is how quickly their heart rate returns to normal after that much stress. That's what we're measuring. So once you are done with the assessment, what you're going to do is you're going to have your client turn around and sit on that step, present their left arm, and you are immediately going to measure their heart rate. And now this is the important part, for a full 60 seconds. So you want to make sure that you measure the entire 60 seconds to get their heart rate. Now, a lot of times, you know, when we're gathering heart rate during a workout or something, we don't want to like hold our freaking, you know, hand to our throat for a full minute, right? So a lot of times what you'll do is you do 6 seconds and you add a 0 to the end, right? I got 16 beats, my heart rate's 160. Great, moving on. You know what I mean? Even the resting heart rate, right? I really like 6 seconds multiplied by 10 for a resting heart rate, or 15 seconds multiplied by 4, right? They're resting. Their heart rate's not fluctuating. You know, it's pretty good to get that number. But the point of the YMCA 3-minute step test is that their heart's going to go like this towards the beginning, and then it's going to start to slow down. And once it gets back to a normal pace, right? Or, well, however close to a normal pace it gets in a full 60 seconds, that's going to determine how well they perform. So if their heart rate was like, you know, I guess that was hard, and then it returned to normal like really quickly, that's a heart that's in really, really, really good shape. And if their heart rate just stays elevated and it continues trying to recover, that's a heart that's not in not so good shape, right? They don't do this anymore. This is not in your textbook anymore. And again, there it is, not typically performed for most youths. Remember that. That is important because we haven't really it's not formulated for kids. Now, here's the thing. They don't say this in your textbook anymore, but when I went in the edition of the NASM that I had, which by the way, I don't know if I've ever showed you guys this. Here's my original NASM textbook, by the way. I don't know if you can see how freaking beat up it is. It doesn't even have a spine on it anymore. But it is a much, much older version. The old, they used to use they were like all about machines back in this version. They were like the chest press machine instead of bench press. The old textbook definition of fit used to be how quickly someone's heart rate returned to normal after intense exercise. That was the definition of fitness. Fitness is defined as how quickly someone's heart rate returns to normal after exercise, which makes a lot of sense when you look at the if you look at like the YMCA 3-minute step test. That's literally what you're measuring. How quickly is their heart rate going back to normal? But then, you know, we got smarter and realized maybe there's more to the idea of fitness than just cardio. Now, another assessment that we've got is the Rockport Walk Test, which is a 1-mile walk test that estimates your client's VO2 max. Now, this also can't really be used on kids because it estimates your VO2 max by using this big, complicated formula. I know I've pulled this up a million times, but VO2 Max Formula Rockport walk test. Do they show the formula? Come on. There it is. So here's the formula. Friggin' insane. It is, and it's always these numbers, by the way. These numbers were picked specifically. 132.853 minus 0.0769 times your weight minus 0.3877 times your age plus 6.13 times your gender, which is kind of weird. It's 0 for women or 1 if you're a male. So basically you don't have to do this if you're female. Minus 3.3. Anyway, and that's your time in seconds, by the way, which means you need to convert, or I'm sorry, it's your time in like decimals. So it's like, you got to figure out how to convert. Like if it's like 1 minute and 45 seconds, it's not 1.45, it's 1.75. So have fun doing that math. Anyway, that is, so there's math within the math. Thanks for that, world. So that's the original like Rockport formula. And it's cool, you know, like it can tell you your VO2 max, or at least it can estimate it, assuming that all of these numbers are, you know, accurate. But maybe they're not. And so honestly, the best way to calculate VO2 max is to go do a VO2 test and breathe into a machine while you're on a treadmill, you know? But it's not bad. Here's the problem. We can't do it with kids because youths don't produce those same cardiovascular enzymes. Remember, they are metabolic non-specialists. And so they have sort of a peak VO2 max, and they can't really develop beyond that until they get older. So because of that, it's very, very difficult to measure. This is another one of the tests we are not going to use on our youths. But the way it works, you put your client on a track. Usually it's much easier to use a track than it is to use a treadmill, and make them walk 1 mile as fast as they can. You're going to measure their weight beforehand, their age. Then you're going to measure how long it took them to do the test, and you're going to measure what their heart rate was at the end of that test. Now, this one's different than the YMCA step test. You do not want to measure it for a full 60 seconds because then their heart rate's going to come down. You want to measure what their heart rate is at the end of that test. So do 6 seconds and multiply it by 10. And so it'll look something like this. Let's take a look here. Rockport calculator. So let's say we got our client here. We'll go female, 46 years old, 210 pounds. Their heart rate was at the end of the test, let's say 158. And it took them 14 minutes and 29 seconds, which is actually 15 minutes and 29 seconds. And then we calculate it. Their VO2 max is about 23.59, right? Not super great, right? So we would definitely give that person a program that is built around their baseline so we can build that up. So let's say you're training them for, let's say 6 weeks, you can do a reassessment. In that 6 weeks, they've lost a couple pounds. Let's say they've lost 10 pounds, they're down to 200. Their heart rate improved a little bit. And instead of being at 158, it's down to 148. I know that seems like a really drastic drop, by the way, but 6 weeks, that's one of the first things that adapts. And it doesn't take 15 minutes and 29 seconds anymore. Now let's say it takes 14 minutes and 48 seconds. And we calculate their VO2 max went from 23.5 to 28, which puts them in the average. So we got them all the way up to average in almost no time, right? And that's not bad, right? So that's sort of how that formula works. It needs to take into account, you know, it has to sort of assume based on how much they weigh and how old they are, like how much oxygen they are estimated to be consuming, and then like based on how long it takes them to do something and what their heart rate is, you know, what their performance was. All right, so those are our 2 most common cardio assessments for adults, but let's look at the ones that we actually do for youths. These are either going to be 1 mile runs, half-mile runs, or quarter-mile runs. And like I said, like they're under the cardiorespiratory assessments category, but honestly, these are performed pretty much like a performance assessment. Right until now, these cardio assessments, we've had tables, right, that show you where you land. You landed in the green zone. That's great. We want to make sure you get this. You landed in the red zone. That's not so great. We want to make sure you get this, right? Like where their score was determines the type of program we give them. We don't have something like that for kids, right? Youths, we just have sort of them versus future them, and we want to see improvement. And that's sort of how performance assessments work. There is no standard, you should be able to lift this much weight, but that is a performance assessment, right? A one rep max squat, right? And when I say there's not a table, that's not 100% true. Like if you're a football player, there's definitely a table, you know? Every football player needs to be able to squat a certain amount in order to be in the NFL. Obviously tables exist, but not for us, not from our perspective. So for youths, for kids, right, you are just going to assess it based on 1 mile run. Now, there is a little bit of data, like normatively, like based on age. But again, that kind of stuff fluctuates so much. I don't put too much stock in it. But again, if your clients are a little younger, you're going to modify that down to a 1/4 mile run or a 1/2 mile run. When I was really quickly, just before I move on, when I was a kid in 5th grade, I broke my knee. I like cracked my patella. I was doing a pretty sick nose wheelie on a razor scooter. And I was like, and then I tried to go down some concrete stairs and just slammed my kneecap right in. I went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, he's a kid, like he's got a little like fracture in his patella, but it'll just heal up and he'll never have any problems. So my parents were like, all right. And he was like, just give him crutches. So I was on crutches when I was in 5th grade, and it was the first time we ever did the 1/4 mile run test in PE. And I was so bummed out because I loved PE and I loved to run when I was a little kid. And I was like one of the fast kids in school. And I was like, I'm still going to do the 1/4 mile run. And my teacher was like, no, you are not. And I was like, oh yeah. And so I went on my little crutches and I had my knee up, and I did this move where I would go like forward and I would like swing through, and I'd have so much momentum. I would land on one foot, hop, and then do the next one, and then get the crutches. And that would give me time to get the crutches forward again. And I outran a bunch of kids because that's actually pretty freaking fast. But yeah, that was my, that was like, I could have came home and my parents were not happy about it. they were all upset. And the next time they saw Mr. Babbitt, they were like, what are you doing letting him run a mile? And he was like, well, first off, it was a 1/4 mile. But you know, I was a little exaggerator. So anyway, those are, that's a youth specific cardio assessment. You can, by the way, you can do that with, it's not like you can't do that with adults, by the way. If that's something they're interested in, if they want to learn how to run a mile faster, great, make them go run a mile and time it. Simple. Now, some performance, this is so weird. This is also out of order. Some performance assessments that are also, what did I do just now? Control, oh boy, X. Hold on, why did that happen? What's going on? Stop it. There we go. So the next category we're looking at is going to be performance assessments. Performance assessments are, again, like I said, just you versus future you. Now for adults, these are things like a 1 rep max bench press, 1 rep max barbell squat, 1 rep max deadlift, right? Military press if you want to. Those are sort of our classic 1 rep maxes. Or maybe it's a performance assessment of like, how fast can you go through this specific SAQ drill? Or maybe it's a Shark's skill test, right? Where you do that lower body agility stuff. Or maybe it's a Davies test where you do that upper body agility stuff, right? Those are all sort of our performance assessments, which are, again, you versus future you, right? There's nothing more specific than that. For kids, because we are going to do 1 rep max, instead we're going to look at these 3 main ones right here, which are really fun for adults too, by the way, just for the record. But there's the 90-degree push-up test, which is the maximum number of push-ups possible by doing 1 repetition every 3 seconds, which does not sound that hard, but it is much harder than you would think. And so it literally, let's see here. It's a push-up assessment that kind of looks like this. So they're going to go here, and it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So it's about this pace. And like that somewhat slightly slow pace for an adult, if you're like any guys in like who are just used to like doing those little half bouncy push-ups, nope. That's a 0 rep. It's a little harder than you would think, but it's kind of fun. And so you do the maximum number possible, and then you can, you know, watch that go up slowly over time. There's also the curl up test, which is isn't what you think it is. It's the number of sit-ups performed in 1 minute. I don't know why they call it a curl up test instead of a sit-up test. I don't have an answer for that. But 60-second timer, how many sit-ups can they do? Hands go like this, elbows touch upper thigh. So when you bring your elbows up, you have to get a little touch there, and that's 1 rep, okay? And that's how you ensure that it's standardized, right? And then there's the standing long jump test, and that one's pretty simple. And let me tell you how depressed I am right now in this moment, because normally this is what we get to go do in the gym after the lecture. As I take everybody and we do all these assessments, and it's a really fun competitive day. Everybody in class tries to get as many sit-ups as they can, and we get whatever. And then we all set up and we do the standing long jump test, and it's so freaking fun. And we do 3 rounds, and we see who can jump the farthest. Irene, do you remember freaking Jay?
Oh, Jay Howard, yes.
Jay Howard, yeah, man. He could just, this guy, he's like a sprinter, like he's training to be like a sprinter, like a pro sprinter. So like his standing long jump was just like, like, you might look into the long jump, Jay. You might be in the wrong event. He crushed it, man. It was awesome. So that's a fun assessment as well. And that's, you know, again, none of these things have standard tables. I mean, it's not that they don't exist. It's just them versus future them. We're just looking for improvement over time. And those are really fun. Now, just 2 that are not in the youth book, but they are in your regular book, so I want you to know these, are the Davies test, which is an upper body agility assessment. What you're gonna do is you're gonna set up 2 markers on the floor that are about 36 inches apart, 3 feet, okay, 36 inches apart. And then what you do is you place your hands with your index fingers on each of those marks. That'll be about this far away. And then what they do is they're going to bring feet together. They're going to be in a push-up position. They're going to reach over and touch one hand to the other. And they're going to go back and forth as fast as possible. And that is the Davies test. And it's measuring your upper body agility, right? There's also the shark skill test, which I can't really demo very well, but you would use a grid of 9 boxes. That was terrible. 9 boxes. And it would be 1 foot by 1 foot each box. So a 3 feet by 3 feet grid of 9 boxes. They stand in the center box, hands on hips, 1 foot in the air. They're going to jump in whatever designated pattern you tell them. Me personally, I really like to just go forward and then clockwise around the square. They're going to jump into the first square and then back. They're always going to return to the center square before jumping to the next one. So it's going to be forward, corner, side, back corner, back, other back corner, side, front corner. And what you do is you time it. And that's the shark's skill test. So upper body agility, right? And lower body agility. It looks like an Irish jig. So those are our 2 performances. Those are the only 2 performance assessments in your regular book, other than bench, squat, and deadlift 1 rep maxes. Actually, deadlift's not in there. Bench and squat. Those are the only 2 that are in your textbook. The sports book has way more. You know, they have all the drills like the 5-10-5 drill and stuff like that. There's a lot more performance assessments out there, but those are the basic ones. Okay, last section here, main section at least, we got our posture assessment. So there's two primary posture assessment types that we are going to look at. There's the overhead squat assessment, which is a fitness assessment in which a client squats with feet shoulder width apart, toes pointing straight forward, arms elevated with your biceps in line with the ears. So you're going to have your client stand, arms up, in line with their biceps, and they're going to squat. Then you are going, what this does is, and this is the definition you want to know, guys. This is the how it's set up, but this is the definition. It is designed to assess dynamic flexibility, core strength, balance, and overall neuromuscular control. So by having the arms up, it's putting stress from top to bottom on the entire body. And that's exactly what we're going for. So it measures their alignment, it measures their risk, right? If they have poor posture, that's going to tell us certain things. Now, there is also the single leg squat assessment, which is a variation. So single leg squat assessment, which is going to be an assessment performed on one leg, squatting to a comfortable height. So they don't, you're going to instruct them to sit as if they're back into it, like squat back as if they're sitting into a chair. But a common mistake people think is they need to sit to chair height in the single leg squat. That's not necessarily true. But they're going to have hands on hips, just like so. And I'm going to have to do this on my right. They're going to have hands on hips, and they're going to squat down just like this. Woo! God. My freaking pelvis. Oh, hold on. Nope. Other side. Nope. Damn. I got knocked out of alignment on Saturday. Really, really bad. So that's our single leg squat. And you might have noticed, actually, I've got fairly good, I'm going to do this one more time, just because I'm a glutton for punishment. But you'll notice I've got pretty good alignment of my knee. For the most part, this isn't something I struggle too much with, right? Like, well, until I lose my balance. Right? I don't get too bad like knee cave in, right? But do you guys notice how much I'm hiking my left hip as I do this, right? Like as I'm squatting, do you see how like this is aligned like this? That's what I'm talking about when I say my pelvis is all screwed up. That's a hip hike. Basically, my SI joint is just kind of stuck, and I'm gonna go have somebody punch me in the butt. It'll fix it. And then I got to do some flexibility stuff. So that is performed on one leg, squatting to a comfortable height. That hip hike stuff, by the way, you guys are going to learn that with Mo. In your regular textbook, the single leg squat, you only look at one thing, which is kind of a bummer. You're just looking to see if the knee caves in. And if it does, it means the same thing as the knees caving in during the overhead squat. But in the corrective exercise textbook, they're going to add a bunch. They're going to look at hip hiking and hip dropping like that. They're also going to look at rotating. You'll see sometimes people will squat like this and they'll rotate a little bit. And you're going to look to see if the knee caves out actually, which is another really common one. And that's it. So also designed to assess dynamic flexibility, core strength, but this one is going to get a little bit more is a little more balance based, right? So our common compensations that we're going to see are going to be there's two very common ones. You're going to look to see if the feet flatten, which is this version here, where a lot of times the inside ridge of the foot starts riding on the floor, or you're going to look to see if the feet turn out. Both of those things are going to tell us that your client is pronating, right? Pronating is a combination of external rotation and eversion of the foot. That ridge coming down like this, that's everting, right? The foot is showing the palm towards the outside of the body, right? It's everting. that tells us that they've got weakness in the anterior tib, they've got tightness in the calf, they've got a little bit of ankle proprioception issues, and they probably have some external rotation problems that are happening above the ankle complex. Their biceps femoris, that little short hamstring muscle on the outside of the thigh, is pulling too hard, and that's internally rotating their femur, which when you internally rotate this, it pulls this bone with it, and that's why they're rotating downwards. You can actually see this if I go like this and I flatten my feet down. Do you guys see how my thighs move? Right? And it's not just that they are moving straight in like this, they're rotating it, right? They're rotating. So the internal rotator muscles are overactive. Knees moving inward, same concept. A lot of times if you have a client whose knees cave in, it is exceptionally rare. In fact, I would say it's so rare that if you don't see it, it's probably because you missed it. If your client's knees cave in, their feet are flattening. You pretty much can't do one without doing the other. And their feet are probably also turning out, although that one, sometimes they can maintain pretty good alignment. So that's another really common one. So when the knees cave in like this, we know the adductor muscles, the adding muscles to the midline, are overactive. Oh my God, yes. Sorry, the new dishwasher's here. Oh, my life is gonna improve by like 5,000% in an hour. So that's overactive adductors, right there, adding in, and underactive abductors up here at the top of the hip, right? So the abductors, which pull the thigh away, are underactive, but the adductors that pull it towards the midline are overactive. And that's why this is caving in. Meanwhile, again, remember, this is also rotating. So the internal rotators are also overactive, and the external rotators are underactive. And that's basically all we're looking at most of the time. A lot of times you can, 8 out of 10 times you can get away with just going to the opposite side of the joint to find the underactive muscle, right? Like a lot of times, like if I've got an arm that should be able to straighten out like this, but it just stays bent like that all day, right? I'm like walking around with that invisible lat syndrome, right? And we've seen people like this. Usually see it in like real gym bros. These guys who have like massive biceps and their arms are just kind of constantly bent. That's an overactive bicep and an underactive tricep. So their arm is just constantly in this bent motion. They need to be able to like extend it out again. So that is, a lot of times it's really easy to just go like, okay, well, this is causing a bending motion. Flip to right, to just go straight to the other side of the joint, right? And there's your underactive muscle. However, sometimes it can also be a synergist thing. Like in this example here, this is a low back arching, right? So what's happening here is the low back muscles here that cause thoracic, lumbar extension are overactive. They're pulling too hard. And the muscles that pull down on the hip here are also pulling too hard. So we're getting what's called an anterior pelvic tilt. Their pelvis is rotating this way instead of remaining neutral with like a nice, like safe, slight low back arch, but nothing too intense curve. So what's happening here? Hip flexors are overactive, opposite side of the joint. Gluteus is underactive. Erector spinae is overactive, right? Opposite side of the joint. Abdominals are underactive. So again, it's pretty easy to go to the opposite side of the joint. However, sometimes it can also be things like, a synergist muscle, right? The hamstring muscles down here might not be doing as much work as they're supposed to either. Or maybe they're doing too much work, and so it's causing synergistic dominance. Next one we're going to see, another two very common movement compensations are going to be an excessive forward lean. That's what we're seeing here, right? So ideally during a squat, what you're looking for, actually I don't have a perfect squat, do I? Well, great. Ideally what we're looking for in a good squat is the line that you draw from your ankle up to your knee should be parallel to the line from your hip up to your shoulders. Ideal parallel squat. Give me a lateral picture without a dumb barbell in the way. Although these are all very good squats. That's not bad. All right, so you can see Yeah, it's not bad. So you can see like a line, if you draw a line from here to here, right? And you draw a line from here to here, for the most part, those are parallel. She's got, I don't know, I guess technically they would intersect slightly, but it's not bad, right? Ideally, we want those to be parallel. In this picture here, you can see she's leaning too far forward. So that is going to come from two places. It's either going to be a tight ankle complex, which means their foot can't dorsiflex, which means that this knee can't travel forward, right? See how far her knee is back behind her toes? A lot of times you hear trainers say, keep your knees behind your toes. That's a decent enough note that gets you 90% of the way, but it's not specific enough to actually be accurate. Your knee should travel forward. And if it goes past your toes, as long as it's not super far past your toes, that's actually okay. There's actually, that's a very common misconception. So it should travel forward, but if it can't, the calf is too tight. Or sometimes what you'll see is the hip flexors, similar to an anterior pelvic tilt, will pull the chest too far forward. And so the abdominal muscles are actually overactive along with the hip flexors. And so everything on the front is pulling down. So it's one of those two problems. You got to figure out which one's which. So what you do is you put a plate under their heels. By elevating this, you take the stretch off the calf. If all of a sudden their squat is perfect, you know that the calf is the problem. But if they still lean forward, even though you elevated the heels, you know that it's the abs and the hip flexors. Okay? And then our last one we're going to see is the arms falling forward. So when the arms fall forward like this, you can see they're not in line with his ears here. And so what that's happening is very, very, very tight lat muscles, right? And those tight lat muscles are basically pulling their arms down towards the floor. And their upper back muscles, which should be pulling from down here, their lower trapezius and their middle trapezius, those are not supporting the arms the way they should be. So, oh, there's the freaking Davies test and the shark skill. This power, okay, it's official. It's not me, it's the PowerPoint. I'm taking no more credit for this goofy order. But those are your upper agility and lower agility assessments. Now, really quickly, I do want to mention, just before we kind of summarize everything up today, one other posture assessment that you're going to do are the pushing and pulling assessments. So when you're performing these are also going to tell you a little bit about overactive and underactive muscles. So ideally, when someone's doing a pull assessment, they should be able to pull their arms back behind their body without their head craning forward like this, without their shoulders elevating like that, or without their low back arching like that. If their low back arches, that actually tells you the exact same muscles as the overhead low back arch. So nothing's different there, right? Overactive erector spinae, overactive hip flexors, underactive abs, underactive glutes. And you can kind of see it, you know, this gives us the illusion of like, you know, you see, I call the low back arch, I always call this Instagram booty, because that's kind of what it looks like. Like they do that pose that you always see where it's just like they drop one leg back and they go boom, you know? And it's like, yeah, you gave yourself the arch, but you don't actually like, those aren't real glutes. If anything, those are weak glutes, which, you know, tell them that. But that's what we're often going to see there. These two, though, if you see the elevated shoulders, that's an overactive upper trapezius muscle, right? The muscle on the side of the neck. And if you see the head come forward, that's an overactive sternocleidomastoid, overactive levator scapulae, and upper trapezius is on that list again. So that one's going to show up twice. So we're going to spend a lot of times like working on, you know, loosening that upper body up. All right, so those are sort of all of our posture assessments. So summarizing everything up, always do an assessment before any training should ever occur, because you need to know about your client's body in order to write a program specifically catered to them. And I guarantee you, if you do an assessment really well, it will do, and like, remember I said this at the beginning, you're done with all your assessment stuff, it's gonna feel a little bit like a workout, like your client will be a little exhausted at the end. If you want to throw some performance assessments their way at the end, you can do that, because then it also kind of feels even more like a little bit of a workout. So make them do a 5-10-5 drill or something through a speed ladder or something like that, right? If you've got a little bit of time to show them some exercises, you can go through that as well. Be like, here's what I know about your core. Try this. And they go, yeah, that's hard. It's like, yeah, that's hard because you're very good at this, but you struggle with this, right? And always try to frame it that way. Be like, you're very good at this type of movement, which is why we're focusing more on this type of movement. That's a very constructive type of criticism. But what you want to do once you're done with that whole assessment, always go back to the desk, sit down and summarize everything you talked about. All right, Irene, so here's what I saw. Your feet turned out a little bit during your overhead squat, which tells me that the outside part of your calf is a little stronger than the inside part of your calf. So we're going to stretch the outside part and we're going to strengthen the inside part. Maggie, what I saw was a little bit of an excessive forward lean, right? You've probably been doing a lot of crunches, which is great, but that's led to a little bit of overactivity and it's pulling you down during your squat. So we got to get you pulled back up this way while you're squatting. Robert, been doing a lot of those pull-ups, man, and I'm seeing a little bit of overactivity in those arms. You're having a little bit of hard time getting your arms up, right? So like little things like that, those little notes, which are constructive and helpful, right? That's like, okay, so Irene, we're gonna foam roll the outside, and I'm gonna have you do calf presses with your toes pointing inward slightly. Maggie, I'm gonna have you do a lot of Supermans. Robert, we're gonna have you do a lot of Y raises, YTAs, right? Wrote you a program in 10 seconds. Right, based on stuff that I made up. So that you summarize all that out, and when you do that, guys, like you'll watch people's faces light up. Look at the heart. You'll watch people's faces light up. They'll go, "I get it. I have to hire you." It'll do the selling for you. I'm telling you. I've been to tons of sales technique things, because that's part of being the trainer. You guys are going to get paid to go to those as well if you work in certain commercial gyms. But none of those workshops, none of those things have ever been as effective for me as just doing my job well. And my job is to identify a problem, solve the problem, and implement the solution. All right. So your subjective information, like your PAR-Q, general medical, right? Your objective, physiologic assessments, heart rate, blood pressure, things like that, body composition assessments, body fat percentage, circumference measurements, all of those, and then your posture assessments, right? If they say yes to anything on the PAR-Q, make sure that you get doctor's clearance. Your general medical history questionnaire is great because it can tell you about past injuries that they have or pre-existing conditions or what their likes or dislikes are. Your body composition assessments are things, your physiologic assessments are things like heart rate, whether that's target heart rate, resting heart rate, whatever. Your body composition assessments are things like your lean body mass, your scale weight, your BMI. That's the subscapular, by the way. And then you've got your cardio assessments. For youth, that's usually going to be like a 1 mile walk run, or it could be if it's an adult, YMCA 3-minute step test, Rockport walk test. Muscular strength and power. For youths, you want to do the push-up test, the sit-up test, and the standing lung jump test. And then when it comes to posture, focusing on the overhead squat. Am I getting punked? There's the Davies test that I wanted a picture of earlier. So a 9x9 box. I'm going to rewrite this power. I don't normally do this, but I'm going to fix this as soon as I'm done with this so that it doesn't happen tonight. So that's what that's going to look like in the shark skill test. And then, make sure you're writing all this information down so that you can write an effective progressive program. Do you guys have any questions? Yes. What's up?
Yeah. So for youth, like warm up, cool down, how many times a week and how long a day? Is that about similar to an adult workout?
Fairly, except that you can kind of beat them up a little bit more because they repair so quickly. Kids are like rubber. You can put them through the meat grinder and they'll be okay. That's terrible. Somebody at NASM's like, someone said something. But yeah, we're gonna look at that as we move through the writing program stuff here in the next few days. But yeah, we'll see a little bit of that. You do want to make sure you're being like the volume's actually reduced a little bit when it comes to like beginner client kids, but the amount of overall activity is increased. Like you can basically do cardio with kids unlimited. Like make them do cardio they can play soccer every day. But when it comes to strength training, we'll reduce that just a little bit, not because it stunts their growth or anything like that, or that they are at more risk for injury. Well, it is because they're at more risk for injury, not because their body's going to get worn out, but because kids have a limited attention span. And the more often you like start to do that, the more bored they start to get, and then they start compensating on, and then eventually like it leads to some type of an injury. So you will see like volume be reduced, but it's not so much because you're worried about a kid developing an overuse injury, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Okay, I do want to show you just really quickly one example of each of these things. I've got some OPT examples here. This is what it was. There we go, yeah. Okay, so let's take a look here. This is a stabilization routine for a client. And you can tell me, for those of you who have been through some of these more assessment classes more times, you can actually tell me what's going on with this client in terms of their overactivity. So if you notice, we're focusing on a total body strength and stabilization as power. We've foam rolled their calves, hip flexors, and lats. So if the calves and the hip flexors are both overactive, right? This is probably a person who has an excessive forward lean. When they squat like this, right? They're being pulled down by their hip flexors in the front, and their calf is not allowing like dorsiflexion to happen, right? So they're basically not bending their knees when they squat. Instead, they're getting depth by just lowering their chest down. And their lats are overactive, which means they're also probably having a hard time keeping their arms up. So there's a classic thing that you see, right? You see those people who are in exercise classes who are doing this kind of thing, where they like lean forward. And they do this like big, like, you know, because they're told like stick your butt out, right? And so they're doing it and they're trying to get low, like maybe the person who's demoing in class, but they're not squatting. They're like hinging. So calves, hip flexors, and lats. So what we did is we want to foam roll the calves in order to turn the muscles off, hip flexor foam roll the hip flexors to turn the hip flexors off, and then foam roll the lats to turn them off. So we're going to SMR to turn these overactive muscles off, right? Then we're going to lengthen out those overactive muscles to keep them from turning back on. So we're going to take advantage of the fact that those muscles are asleep. We're going to do a static calf stretch. We're going to do a kneeling hip flexor stretch, and we're going to do a ball lat stretch. Now, if it were me, and I had, and I mean, I guess it probably was me, but if I had another slot here, I would probably also throw an abdominal stretch their way, like a cobra or maybe a over the ball stretch, in order to stretch out their abdominals as well. You don't foam roll the abdominals, but you can absolutely like lengthen them out because that's also associated with forward lean. And then we threw them on the treadmill for 50 to 60% of their heart rate max. Now, I always do this example where I put this percentage here. Honestly, guys, in the real world, because you'll know, right? Let's go back to our client from earlier. So 190 times, let's say 50 to 60%, 0.5. So that'd be 95, 190 times 0.6. So we would say, instead of putting 50 to 60%, we would say like when we give them this piece of homework and it's like, here's your warm up, we'd say, I want you to be a heart rate between 95 and 114. You would actually tell them you'd put the heart rate numbers here instead of the percentage because you don't want to make your client do math. So those are the underactive stuff, right? Those are the overactive muscles. We turn them off and then we lengthen them out. Now we need to turn the underactive stuff on. We did a prone iso abs here, which I like, but honestly, if it were me, it was me, but you know, hindsight's 2020. I would probably give them like a Superman instead. I'd probably give them like a prone cobra, although prone iso abs is really good as well. This is a plank, by the way. It does still very much work on, you know, the low back, but generally the iso abs are for the transverse abdominis. Now here's the thing, this isn't a lot, like when you see that you might be like, well, don't you not want to strengthen the abs if their abs are pulling them down? There's two parts to your abs. The prone iso abs works the stabilizing part. The part that pulls you forward is the crunching part. So I do want to avoid crunches, but a prone iso abs is actually a pretty good exercise for this person. That being said, a cobra probably would be even better. And then single leg lift and chop, that's actually where they're just standing on one leg like this, and they're gonna lift a medicine ball up overhead and then back down, right? That is gonna be a really great exercise because that's literally the opposite of their lats, right? Their lats pull this way. A lift and chop pulls this way. So that's perfect on being an opposite muscle. And then a squat jump to a box jump to stabilization is just a very good reactive exercise for the legs. It also gives you an opportunity on that lift and chop, by the way, to dorsiflex the toe, which is the opposite of the calves, which we really like. And then we've got a normal workout built down here, but we'll get more into that as we move through things later on. But this is where you really address all that stuff that you found in your overhead squat, right? So let's say my client, just for the sake of argument here, let's say instead, I said I was gonna have you guys pick. Hey, give me a movement compensation. I just realized I totally forgot I said I'd do that. Somebody give me a thing. Not excessive forwardly. Anybody?
What was the question, Brett? Like,
give me a movement compensation. Like low back arch, feet turn out, knees cave in, something like that.
Knees cave in.
Knees cave in, right? So we know our overactive muscles are going to be the biceps, femur. Oh, it won't fit. Okay. BFem. So that's going to be their biceps femoris, right? We know that that's an internal rotator. That's what's causing a lot of knees, that knee valgus. We're going to do adductors, right? And other knees cave in, we're going to go with TFL, right? The TFL is a hip internal rotator. The biceps femoris is a tibial external rotator, which in relation to the femur is internally rotated. So that's why that causes to pull this way. And we know the adductors are adducting. So those are all of our overactive muscles. So then we would do a static biceps femoris stretch. We would do a static adductor stretch, and we would do a static TFL stretch. And there we go. We just rewrote our warm-up for a client, for a different client, right? And then we would do different exercises here. Instead of prone iso ab, I mean, yeah, that actually still would work. So we can leave that one alone. Single leg lift and chop, I'd probably change to a lateral step up to balance, right? So that way they have to use their abductors to step up, right? And so I'm using their abductors instead of their adductors. And then a box jump to stabilization. I'll probably do the same thing. I'll probably do a lateral box jump to stabilization. Yeah. No, it won't fit. Right? That's how we do it.
Sorry, guys.
You out of here, Robert?
No, I was talking to my dog. That's why I talked to him.
Oh, okay. No sweat. So that's how we use all of our information. That's why assessments are so important. We just wrote two totally different routines for two totally different people. And we will continue practicing that as we move through the rest of this class.
Brad, what does the lateral box jump look like?
I don't have a box with me, but imagine there's a box next to me. It would just be it'd be that on top of a box.
Challenge. Challenge.
What? Yeah, it's fun. It's a good one. there's that one, and then there's also, I would actually probably say a transverse one would be really good too. Like you could also just do that. That's a really fun one.
On a
Both those
box?
are really good because they're external rotators that you're using. And yes, onto a box. And yeah, let you guys out of here. Feeling good? All right, guys. We'll see you tomorrow is Thursday. So Friday, we're going to do an SAQ thing. So details to come. It'll be really fun. But we'll play some fitness games. It sucks because we're not going to get through the SAQ lecture before we actually go do the SAQ exercises, but they want me to do it on Friday, so it is what it is. But it will be fun. We're going to do a whole bunch of cone stuff, and everybody's going to bring water because it's 1,000,000 degrees out. All right, guys. See you later.
Bye, Brad. Have a nice day.
Yeah, you too.
You guys have a good one.
Yep. Have fun on your run, Irene.
Yeah, Brad, real quick, what happened to Jay Howard?
Oh, he's in Capstone.
Oh, he's already moved on?
Yeah, he's in Mo's class right now. We got him for another. He's gonna graduate in like.
Couple of weeks.
Yeah, like 2 weeks.
When I was supposed to graduate.
Oh, I know.
It's all good. I'm learning a lot.
Yeah.
Brad, I don't have a pulse on my left wrist because is that possible? Because I have numbness on my thumb and my index finger from the injury that I had when I broke my bone. So is it possible that one of the vein got cut off?
No, it's probably just that there's some scar tissue, and so you just can't feel it. It's probably just like so stiff that you can't get like a good feel. It's there. Try going up a little higher. Or you can go, this is nuts. You can go up a little higher and sometimes find it. Or you see this on my thumb right there.
That scar, or is that a vein?
That's a vein actually. So that's the same one. You can also sometimes just feel it there. I actually use that when I'm in the gym and I don't want to look like a weirdo. I will do this while I'm running sometimes to count my own pulse. So that people don't notice that I'm like, being like, how's my pulse? I don't want to be like overzealous at the gym.
I see.
I mean,
okay.
I wear these nowadays, but like, that's what I used to do.
Because that automatically measures it for you, right?
Yeah.
I'm not feeling anything, but I'll look for it.
Yeah, I'm sure it's there. They definitely wouldn't take out your blood vessel.
Alrighty, cool. Thanks, Brad. See you tomorrow.
Of course. I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.
Bye.